Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us here on Level Up with Your Sinclair Method Coaching. Today I've got Samara with us. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm ready to go. I'm so excited to do this.
Awesome. Um, so, what I always like to do, because we are on Twitch, is I like to start with an icebreaker. Are you a gamer at all, or have you been? This could be video games, it could be board games,
Okay.
and
Okay.
anything.
You know what's so funny is I've never really been a gamer since the Atari days, back in the old school days. I actually played those games, but my husband, he is a massive gamer. He loves gaming. So he's a big fan of Twitch.
Okay. So maybe your husband will watch the replay.
Oh, you definitely will. Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, I had one of those early Ataris that were basically the 8-bit one joystick and one red button.
The little
Yeah, as a kid, somehow for a while, ours ended up in my room, and I had this tiny little. I don't know, maybe it was a 12-inch black and white TV that my grandmother had like upgraded from. It was a super small thing. And I would play Frogger, but it was after I was supposed to go to bed.
Oh, really?
And in my house, like we weren't allowed to shut our bedroom doors at night. So I would grab a blanket and I'd put it over the television and I'd put it over my head and build myself this little tent so that no one could see that I was awake in there with the TV on playing Frogger. And I was horrible at it, but that was just me being a little rebel. Like,
You little rebel, Jenny. So that's the story. That's really interesting. I love that game. That was one of my favorites back then.
were you any good at it? Because
No.
I was good at the Atari game, but when I went out and tried to play the arcade game, it didn't translate. Like I was really good at the Atari.
I
I
don't think I
was
was good at any of those
I was
games.
miserable at the arcade version. But then we'd also
I didn't know there was much of a difference.
yeah.
Uh,
Did you ever play the one where it's just like the two, you had the little controller that was the knob and it had the little thing that goes up and down and you ping pong the little square ball off?
oh, I don't know that. Oh, wait a second. What was that
I
called?
don't remember what it was
I don't know.
called, but
No.
yeah, it was just a little square ball because they couldn't even do a little round one back then.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just like
No,
this
those are
pixel that just would bounce and you would have to block it and bounce it back to your opponent and try to get
the
past
pixel.
it.
Yeah.
We've come so far on on video games.
There's something very I don't know, it feels good to think back on those games though, like something very comforting.
They were simplistic,
Yeah.
almost like a way to. And back then, when you're a kid, you like. How did we get from kids who are able to just not push ourselves 100% of the time to adults that have problems allowing ourselves to rest without feeling guilty about it? I mean, I know I see that, I feel that, but I see it in like my clients and in the online forums. What are your thoughts on that, Samara?
On resting now
On
versus
resting without feeling guilty.
without feeling guilty. I think rest had to become like a skill that I learned as an adult. But as a child, it's different because, we don't have responsibilities. Our only thing to do every day, well, we do have to do schoolwork, right? We have to do schoolwork, but we get to play. So it's all about playing and then resting. And that's like baked into to our lifestyle as a child, right? But as an adult, yeah, It took me a long time to get to the point where I actually had to value my rest and like really prioritize it. And then what does rest look like? You know, sometimes rest is just allowing myself to lay in front of the TV on the couch and just like watch a movie, you know? And other times it's like, I need a whole Sunday in bed, or just no, I'm not going to check my email. You know, I just need to like tune out. And I think for a lot of us, even going to AUD and to drinking and alcohol, rest became, or alcohol became my reward or my rest, right? And so that's how I rested, or I thought I was resting, but it wasn't real rest. You know, that's how I perceived alcohol, was like, oh, I get to relax now. I get to just, you know, shut off the day and just unwind and just be done with the day. And that's my resting, but it wasn't real rest because you don't wake up rested. So,
you know, but we live in an era, you know, I think it's just, you become adults and we start feeling like we always have to be productive. We always have, when we set a goal, we always have to be working toward it. Always progress, always some sort of movement. And so what happens is we end up, you know, just diminishing our ability to make good decisions. Decision fatigue is a real thing. And when we do stop, it's usually because we crash. We crash out, and then that's also not really resting. It's just recovering.
so true.
Because, you know, and I hear this from people who struggle with, you know, they're starting to do alcohol-free days only because they drank so much the night before that they feel horrible the next day. And so they're not truly able to accept that alcohol-free day for the good things it should be, because they're associating it with, I feel horrible. So talk a little bit about, you know, how we can use rest and also some self-compassion to keep ourselves from getting to that point where we hit the wall, we hit the decision fatigue, we see our executive function go out the window, and we go into default mode. So how do we be proactive to avoid that?
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I this is a topic that I truly enjoy, and I had to really hone these skills when I was going through this journey, the TSM journey back in 2021. And it was about checking. Well, these are techniques and skills that I teach my clients, right? But it was really about checking in with yourself, like from a moment to moment basis, and seeing how you're doing. Like, what are my needs right now? What do I need? Do I need water? Do I need to eat? Do I need a nap? Do I need to shut my eyes for 20 minutes? You know, it's very practical little check-ins throughout the day. And I figured this out, especially on days when I'm not feeling so good. Like on a day when I'm like not okay, like I'm in a weird, funky headspace. I'm like not feeling, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling discouraged or something. Something's off. I check in with myself. What do I need right now? This was something I never, ever did before in my life. I never checked in with myself to see what I needed. Right. And so in that process of learning how to do this, which by the way, was spurred on through self-compassion, because I compassionately looked inward and saw, oh, I need something. There's a need here. What is this need? And when I first started doing this work, I didn't even know what my needs were. That's how disengaged I was from like my basic necessities, like I really didn't know what my needs were. I just knew that I was craving alcohol, right? It becomes like the reward, the need, the rest, everything. So in this process of TSM, like training myself to have other rewards and have other ways of rest and relaxation, I learned this whole technique of tuning into my needs in the moment. And then sometimes it's like, go for a walk at the park. Like I need to get out in nature. I need to go to the park. So it's just that skill, and it is a skill. It can be learned and it can be, developed, cultivated. And it's a beautiful thing when it becomes a habit.
And for people who struggle with this or who haven't really started, maybe they're not at the point yet where they really even know what they need. A lot of times what I've seen is that people can often feel as though even the act of checking in on their own needs is selfish. And so how do you help clients get over that first, like that's a huge barrier for people who especially are givers, helpers, people pleasers, people who are always focusing on other people first and what they need. Sometimes it can be really like you feel like it's indulgent to say, okay, but what do I need right now? And you feel it's indulgent, you feel it's selfish, and it's really difficult to actually start paying attention to your own needs as long as you're holding on to that feeling. So how do you help clients get past that?
Yeah, that's so good. And I have to really think back to when I was in the midst of the TSM journey and what was happening for me, because I was just that way. Exactly. I was a people pleaser. I was always tuned up to what other people needed. I was raised that way, to be that way. So there was this underlying sense in my family that tuning into my needs was selfish and that it was all about other people's needs. And so what spurred this work was TSM, actually, because now that I was actually having to face my AUD, my alcohol use disorder, I had to become a little bit selfish because I had to heal. I had to do some inner healing, and I had to cultivate new coping skills that I never had. So I actually had to tune in and like focus in on myself for a little while. And that is where all of a sudden this work with the self-compassion started coming in, because I started to notice all the ways that I was just being so awful to myself. Like I was just speaking to myself horribly. And you can't get anywhere when you're treating yourself like that. It's just a vicious cycle. And then it actually causes more drinking, So I had to really take a step back and look inward and see what is happening here and why am I being this way to myself? And is there a different way that I can be? And then when I started adding in that self-love, self-kindness, self-compassion, that was all a new thing. That's when I was able to start tuning into my needs. And at first, like I said, I didn't even know what my needs were, so I was just little by little learning. So yeah, long answer. I take my clients through those steps. I show them how this is actually, for a time, it's okay to put other things on the back burner while you focus in on your AUD, like addressing it, knowing what's underneath it, like discovering what's underneath it.
Well, it's funny. I know everybody's probably heard the phrase, you can't pour from an empty cup. Well, recently I heard something that takes that a little bit further. If you try to pour from an empty cup, nothing really happens except you're not adding to whatever you're trying to pour into. I've started thinking about it this way, is you can't boil water in an empty pot, because the higher up you turn the heat, if you don't have anything in the pot, not only you're going to damage the stove, the pot, you're going to burn the whole house down trying to do
Right.
what you don't have in you. And
wow, that's so good.
And so when it comes to, because people do have very legitimate reasons why, you've got parents. Yes, they have to take care of their kids. They have to put their kids' needs first in a lot of situations. And so there's also that thought that taking care of yourself is one of the best ways you can take care of someone else. Because if you're burning your own house down, not only are you not helping the people you're trying to help, you might be damaging them in the process. And so I'm trying to encourage people to shift from self-care is selfish mentality to remember that if your self-care enables you to help others better, then it is the least selfish thing you can do, because you're actually helping the people around you by helping yourself.
Yeah, it's a whole mindset shift. And I think a lot of us were raised in those types of homes where self-care was selfish, and it was very virtuous to consider others first. But then at your own detriment, you're not taking care of yourself. So yeah, it's a whole mindset shift. And a little story, I was on a plane during this time, and I heard them, how they give the little speech and they say, put your mask on before you put your child's mask on. And that had a huge impact on me that day. I had heard it thousands of times before, but in that instance, it was like an aha moment for me, because I was in the middle of learning all of these things through TSM. And I was taking this little course about self-compassion. And then I heard this over the speaker and I was like, oh my gosh, it's so true. You have to put your mask on before you put your child's mask on. Because then if you're messed up, then you can't help your child in a crisis. And it was just this beautiful moment. I had this, this realization of how important self-care is and how we can help others more. We're more there. We're more present for them when we take care of ourselves first. That's why TSM is so powerful, because we're taking care of ourselves. We're addressing our AUD so that we can be more of service later on after we're done with that,
Yeah. And it's not an easy thing, because it does require unlearning. And, and it takes practice, because it's easy to go into the default mode. It's easy to respond to everybody else's crises. But self-compassion also doesn't mean not taking accountability. So how do you help your clients balance being accountable for reaching their goals and working as a partner with the TSM process, versus being judgmental when they miss a goal or had a higher drinking night or week? And so there is a balance between being accountable so that they can do better in the future, and being judgmental and harsh and being their own biggest bully for having, as they would say, messed up.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So that's also where self-compassion comes in, because that's how I really teach personal accountability. So you're being accountable to yourself, to your own goals, to your own standards, to your values that you want to have in life, to your future self, who you are becoming. So that is kind of like a foundation of what I teach. And then the self-compassion comes in because we do mess up on our goals, and we do have upticks in drinking when we're on this process. And we do, we miss the mark sometimes, and we have to get back up and start over. So that's where the self-compassion comes in that I teach, because that is where you can really become your own best cheerleader. I mean, you can really be on your own team, when you're missing the mark, or when you're not measuring up to the standards you set, or you just feel like you're discouraged because you're not where you want to be or where you think you should be. um that's where it's really the self-love, the self-kindness that you can offer yourself. And research shows that self-compassion, the amount of self-compassion that you have for yourself in the midst of mistakes, like regarding mistakes, that is what leads to progress. That's what leads to success. That's what leads to more motivation. So it's all research backed. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so big on self-compassion. It's one of the main focal points of my practice.
And that's honestly because it's so important. I mean, I'm sure we've all had that day where we feel like one cross word or phrase or look could send us crumbling. But the most important thing is making sure that it doesn't come from within ourselves.
Right.
Because
Right.
we can't always control what the rest of the world is going to throw at us.
Right.
And
Right. And
this is part of building resilience too. So talk about it in a little bit more in the light of resilience, which is basically just, bouncing back when things go wrong.
yeah. Yeah. Resilience. That has been such a topic recently in my community. And I think that resilience is, well, this is my theory. The more alcohol-free days we start having, the more resilience we can build. And it's just what we've seen time and time again is that alcohol creates lack of resilience. And so the more AF time we can have, we start to be able to handle things again, handle things that used to like fall, make us fall apart. And now
And do you have a theory as to why?
well, I mean, it, I don't, scientifically, I would have to look that up and see if they've done any studies on alcohol and resilience, but I know that it decreases our ability to handle stress.
I mean,
Like,
my personal thoughts on it are that, especially for anybody who's come to TSM, having tried 12 step, having just tried white knuckling themselves through long periods of time, that's a very defeating process. Every single drop of alcohol is branded as a failure.
mm,
And when you feel like every time is a failure, that weighs on you. And so that just continues to diminish your sense of self, your sense of
mm,
confidence, your ability to believe that you are actually capable of change. But
so true.
what you're describing with alcohol free days, building resilience, every alcohol free day, even if even going beyond that, if your goal is to only drink two tonight and you only drank two tonight, you're meeting a goal. Every single goal you meet big or small, reinstates and reinstills inside you that you are capable of making good decisions. You're capable of changing your behavior, and you're capable of succeeding. But more importantly, you should allow yourself to trust yourself again, is what every success says. Maybe I can trust myself. And that's terrifying after years, and in some cases, decades of every single drink is a complete and utter failure and a mark of how terrible you are and can't do all of these things. Being able to trust yourself again is both terrifying and liberating. And so I would venture that is why stringing additional alcohol-free days together, meeting drink cap goals, even if your goal is I'm going to make this glass of wine last an hour before I pour another one, being able to set a goal and achieve a goal says you're regaining your power, and the alcohol is letting go of the power.
Yeah, so well said, Jenny. So well put. That's the beauty of the Sinclair method and why I'm here today. Why I want to scream this from the rooftops. It's so completely different than the vicious cycle of shame and guilt that I went through with abstinence and trying to get sober and trying to stay sober and failing year after year with that. And I was, just like you said, I was a shell of a person when I came out of that. And then I found the Sinclair method and all this hope came back, and then it was little baby steps, and I talk a lot about the phases in my practice. And in phase 1, you want to really set really small, achievable, goals. Like you don't want to overdo it. You want to do small little things that that you can achieve. And then we graduate. We go to phase 2 where you can set those bigger goals. And then phase 3,
Yeah, I call them super stupidly silly, simple goals. Like the smaller, the better.
Yes,
Set those goals so stupidly simple that no matter what, you just cannot possibly fail at them. It might literally mean, pour your drink in a different glass.
Yeah.
It could mean sit on the other side of the sofa when you're watching your favorite show that you like to drink with while watching. It just make it something like, and if you can make it silly, then it'll stick in your mind.
I like that. It's a good idea. I started with the goal of simply waiting an hour and putting that hour on a time, thing on my phone. So there, I was waiting the hour and I was waiting for the little thing to go off, know?
Yeah. And I've told people, if you need to start moving back your time period, and this is especially true for people who, there seems to currently be an over-reliance on, I'll just redose if I'm drinking for longer than 6 hours. And it seems to be replacing I'm going to try to limit my drinking to a 6 hour or less time period. So when people are trying to shorten that drinking period, can you wait 5 minutes longer? If you can do 5, then, next day do 10 minutes. If that feels comfortable and it's not difficult and you're not like, okay, when is this up? Go to 15, and just keep, even if you just increase it by 5 minutes a day, in 12 days, you've taken an hour off your drinking sessions.
That's good. That's good.
If you hit a time period where, okay, well, now I'm waiting an hour, now an extra hour, now this is starting to feel feeling a little more difficult. Just stay there for a while until it feels easy. That's okay.
It's okay.
You're allowed to stay stagnant to get comfortable with something, because that will help it become sustainable. I mean, I don't know anyone who would go to the gym and just significantly increase the amount of weight they're doing every single time and expect that they're not going to just hit a wall and break down.
Right. It's small incremental steps that lead to the big changes that we end up having on TSM.
And I think for a lot of people, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because it's the small changes. Yes, the end change is big, but sometimes it's not, it doesn't arrive with all like this fanfare that people expect. People are expecting too often, I believe, that one day they're just going to wake up and, hey, this is it. And I'm never going to think about alcohol again. And I'm never going to drink it again. Or I'm only going to drink it on the weekends. And I'm just not like, one morning I'm going to wake up and there it is. But the reality is it's very rarely like that. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, because there's certainly some people who have experienced it that way. But talk a little bit about how the focus on those small wins and those small successes can sometimes overshadow the fact that the huge change really is occurring.
Yeah, I mean, it often does. And that's why a lot of our progress is very subtle and it can go unnoticed. And that's where a coach comes in, because we really help shed light on progress. And so we teach certain skills on how to notice that progress. And one of those is, comparing yourself, to your former self, the you from a year ago, or the you from 6 months ago. How would you have behaved with this bottle of wine back then? What would you have drank? And then the amount you would have drank, or you wouldn't have poured out those last, that last pour, you wouldn't have poured that out in the sink. But now you're having this type of progress, so that's another beautiful thing. I call those TSM miracles. We have a lot of TSM miracles on this path, and those can keep you grounded. And that's one of the other things I teach people is like, pay attention to these wins that you have, these little miracles that happen on this method, because that can show you what your future will be. It's gonna be more normal in the future to have these things happen.
And talk about how a coach in particular can really help with that, because the Sinclair method, unlike other modalities of treatment where you overly focus everything on the past and all the mistakes and everything else, TSM is very forward thinking.
Yeah.
So it's kind of common that people will ignore that past progress. So talk about how you as a coach consciously assist them in learning that it is okay to look in the rearview mirror. And in fact, sometimes it's really helpful because you can't see how far you've come without doing it from time to time. It doesn't mean put the car in reverse. It doesn't mean turn around and stare at it the whole time. But you do need to look back, whether that's through journals, read old journal entries, look at your drink charts, think about it. So how do you help guide people so that they're able to do that in a productive way that doesn't necessarily, focus on the negative stuff, but more on the growth aspect?
Yeah. So TSM is very, it's very focused on like logs and journaling, and so it's not a linear process because there's ups and there's downs, there's upticks in drinking, there's lower times of drinking. And it's like a lot of times people will get all focused in on that stuff, their drink log, and they went up by 2 drinks the night before, and oh no, and it's like that's where I come in, and I give them perspective, and I show them like, where were you 6 months from now, or 3 months, sorry, 3 months before, where were you and what were you doing? And then during our sessions, they often have like these aha moments where they realize they're actually progressing. But it's really hard to see progress when you're in this kind of uncomfortable growth. I mean, I'm not going to say that it's totally comfortable. It's just not. It's just any type of growth is going to have some discomfort. And so when you're in the trenches of this, it's really good to have a coach to give you perspective and to show you, look, on Saturday, you actually had a win. You can actually find the silver lining in certain like situations, and I help them discover the silver lining and see, oh, look where I went right in this perceived setback. Look what I did right. And then what can I do next time to make it even better? So.
And a lot of the perceived setbacks, I think, not only in addiction, I think this is pretty much a human trait. A lot of us, when we don't feel like we have hit that perfect goal of what we were intending, we criticize ourselves and go really hard on ourselves, just as much as, because we mistakenly believe it's going to motivate us, but also because it's a defense mechanism. If we're really hard on ourselves, then, anybody else can throw whatever at us because no one's going to be harder on ourselves than we are. So talk a little bit about how you help your clients let go of that defense mechanism in order to recognize that success doesn't mean perfection, and that all progress is good, even if it wasn't as much as they initially wanted at that time in that time period.
Oh, yeah. So I think a common theme with people with AUD is this black and white thinking, like this all or nothing thinking. And it's exactly what I had as well. I had this faulty way of viewing success and progress through this lens of black or white. You're either all, doing the green juice cleanse and working out, or you're doing none of it. You're just off, And so I think AUD can like breed that. Like it can, like, even if we have that perfectionist type of thinking before AUD sets in, it can like exacerbate it, And so a lot of us come that way to TSM. And so that's my job, is to really coach people in what does actual progress look like? And actual progress is just like a couple steps forward, and then a step back, and then another couple steps forward, and then whoops, I messed up. Okay, get back up again, couple more steps forward. And then eventually, you're teaching yourself all of these new habits. So eventually there's massive reward that comes out of that process. But it is, when you're in the midst of it, it doesn't look like a lot of progress. It looks like a couple steps forward and a couple steps back all the time. So yeah, it's a mindset shift.
And then, this is one of those things that will come up till the end of time in the peer support communities. and you've personally had experience with this, the person who comes in, I don't know why, I was doing well on TSM, and I don't know why I stopped. I thought I was okay. I stopped taking my medication. I started drinking. How do I start again?
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
and the easiest answer is you just start. It really is that simple. From an actual medication protocol point of view. But talk a little bit about your experience and how and even like the experience you've seen in your clients, the mental aspect of starting over again. And what is a good way to reframe your mind when you know that for whatever reason you goofed, you relapsed, you started drinking without your pill, but you've learned from it enough to say, how do I get started again? So talk about that.
Yeah, that's such a good one. I don't think it's talked enough about. And I think that's also where coaching can come in, because we can really help you with perspective. In this type of scenario, I think that the majority of us have done this. The majority of people who've tried to implement TSM have done this. I would say the minority is the people that try it once and it works for them. The rest of us tried it a few times. And so how do you get yourself to have that progress mindset where instead of that black and white thinking, because I thought, just going back to my own experience, I thought I was a failure because I tried TSM and then I got off of it and my drinking all came back again. Everything came back, the cravings, the whole thing. And then there I was again, I had failed. How did I change that? And I didn't have a coach back then. So the best way that I did was I filled myself up with knowledge, like the scientific knowledge of this method. So I read the book, I read the book again. Sorry, I have something in my throat. I looked for peer support. I went on Facebook. I joined a few of the TSM meetups. I just tried to get a lot of support, and that's how I got more courage to try it again. And then I would say the last thing is I viewed other people's stories of failure, with it and how they eventually succeeded, like success stories. And that was really motivating. I think that was the icing on the cake, was that I saw, like, if that person can do it, I can do this. I can definitely do this. I can start over. I can do it again. So,
and some people, they're afraid. They're actually a little bit more afraid the second time around because they saw it work, and they're a little more afraid that because they messed up and relapsed, that maybe it's not going to work for them the second time around, or maybe they'll, do the same thing again. Did you have any of those, that heightened sense of fear coming back to it the second time?
Maybe early, before I started filling myself up with knowledge. But I think this was the main kicker, was that I saw the research and I realized that what do you think about this? The number one reason why people fail on TSM, I think it's because they don't give it the time that it needs. They quit too soon.
I think that is definitely high up there. I would say if I were going to do a list of things, that would definitely be right up there, along with false expectations. I think people who don't give it enough time fail to do so because they're expecting that, hey, within 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to be back in control, and it's all, it's all walk in the park from there. But I would say that the lack of time, lack of support is the other thing. And support, and this is where coaches are so important. Coaches can help individuals set manageable expectations and actually understand what the process is like, what the common failures and successes are, and how much time it's going to take, because every single person comes to TSM with a different drinking pattern and a drinking history. And someone who is just becoming uncomfortable with how their drinking is and they want to nip it in the bud right now so that it doesn't get that bad is going to respond like night and day to someone who has been an around the clock, if I'm awake, I am intoxicated drinker who has done that for 30 years. There's nothing even remotely similar about how they're going to respond to the Sinclair method, with the exception of following the protocol. The amount of time difference it's going to take, the amount of reduction, the amount of support, the amount of additional needs that might happen. And that's why the support is so critical. Coaches bring context to the Sinclair method journey, and knowledge without context is almost useless. And I believe that that's especially, I mean, our coaches, I mean, you've been with us, what, 3 or 4 years now? You know,
3.5.
Most of our coaches have been doing this for a very long time. Most of our coaches have personally walked the ups and downs of the Sinclair method. You have talked to thousands of people who aren't even your clients, just through the peer support groups. And so you have seen the nuances. You've seen that what works for one person might be absolutely garbage advice for somebody else. And so when you're talking one-on-one with a client, you're giving them the support that they say they need. And a lot of it is looking at the client and just honestly realizing that they're the ones who know what they need best. And our job is just to help them figure that out.
Very well put. Yes, it's so tailorable, this method. It's so gentle. It's so tailorable to your specific needs and situation.
Yeah, and peer support's great. Peer support is incredible. It's critical. But peer support requires you to go through all the advice and to pick and choose and to try to figure it all out on your own. And you know, and a coach can help tailor that specifically for you. And it's kind of like going through the advice of thousands of people and picking out the right stuff for them to choose from.
Yeah, this process, if your expectations are managed, you can have a much easier time and your perspective can be enlightened, actually, and you can actually finish the whole process.
I mean, how many what percentage of your clients would you say have come to you and said, Samara, I am so frustrated with the process. I'm not sure that it's really even working. What am I doing? And then you ask them some questions and your reply is, wow, you're actually doing really well. What percentage of your clients would you say fits that?
I would say about 90%. 90%, you know, I help them walk through whatever their challenge is, and then they come out of it with a better perspective and some action steps, you know, some achievable action steps.
But like, isn't it just amazing and fulfilling when you see that turnaround, and from somebody who really, they get on that first call very frustrated and you see that weight lift. I mean, just talk about the fulfillment.
I mean, it's one of the reasons that I chose this as a career. I just like, I get to do this. I get so excited because I get to do this. But yeah, it thrills me to see when they've noticed something, a progress that they didn't see before, or in the middle of our session when they start having these aha moments and they're like, oh, I didn't see that, oh my gosh. And they have this renewed hope and this renewed kind of motivation to keep going. It's beyond thrilling.
Yeah, and those aha moments really do serve as motivators. Like, because you see clients sometimes just once when they just have a bunch of questions, but you generally see clients multiple times. So talk a little bit about how, like, the general progression that you see in your clients.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so sometimes when they're first starting, they will meet with me once a week or once every other week, just to kind of get the ball rolling and get everything, start all their questions answered, because they'll have multiple questions, initial questions. And then as they're kind of going into the middle part of it, like phase 2, maybe we meet, once a month at that point, or once every 3 weeks, and then I watch how they progress, and then some of them reach extinction. They tell me, but they still want to check in once in a while, like maybe every 4 months, like they'll check in with me or something like that. So yeah, I mean, it's just a beautiful thing. Extinction, I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, we're one of the things that I'm trying to reiterate through the peer support groups is that extinction is about cravings. And so when you have the choice, if, when, and how much you drink, whether you want to call it extinction or not, you're there. If the cravings aren't driving the show, then you're there. And I feel like a lot of people are very hesitant to admit that they're at that end process of extinction, where all they're basically doing is maintaining it at that point while reaching for additional goals.
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense that you would be hesitant to announce that it's extinction. I mean, it is a subjective experience, it's like a feeling that you get. But I always say extinction is just the beginning.
And that is absolutely correct, because when you look at Dr. Sinclair's science, extinction was that 3 to 4 month zone, because that's the cravings. That's the compulsive craving and acting on the compulsive craving and urge. Everything beyond that is all the behavior change, all the habit change, all the de-stressing your life, all the addressing any other issues in your life that are causing you to want to drink, if you have them, whether that's, I've known people who have changed jobs because they've realized that their job is just so stressful and then they go to a different job, and without that stress, that urge to drink, it's crazy. But you can't make those decisions while the craving monster is constantly clawing at you. And so, sorry, I just had a little cat monster decide that he's going to wake up from his nap.
Little kitty cat.
And, but yeah, it's, I feel like, unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there who are saying things like, I've been on TSM for 2.5 years, 3 years, and I haven't reached extinction. And I don't know.
You went out of focus.
I know. I was just noticing that. I don't know what's happening with my. with my camera there. It's very strange, and it's happening on Zoom as well. So, let me just stop the. Oh, that was the wrong one. Stop the video real quick, and
there you go.
Yeah, try that.
You switched the view.
I switched the perspective, but
looks good.
Yeah, whatever happened, I'm not sure, but yeah, I think people they believe that they're 2-3 years in and not at extinction, even though they'll readily admit they have no cravings left. And it's like, yeah, you actually got there a long time ago. You just need some help and support in taking care of the partnering portion.
Absolutely. I often talk about there's two sides of extinction. There's the pharmacological extinction, which is what you're talking about with the cravings are gone. You have control over alcohol. But then there's the psychological, emotional reasons we drink, the ways that we cope and the ways that we're not finding other ways of coping, and all of that requires a little bit more support, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, the reason why so many people don't find the help they need through strictly, cognitive based talk therapy on addiction is because it doesn't address the cravings itself. It tells you how to manage them, how to push them off, how to defer them, but it doesn't actually eliminate them. Mm-hmm. So it only does half the job. Mm-hmm. Well, with the Sinclair method, if you only take the pill portion and you don't do the other part, you're still only doing half the job.
Yep.
But it's the other half.
The other half. It's the
but
other
you're
half.
Still only doing half of it. And so it's going to make it that much more hard to. And so sometimes it's taking people without good tailored support 2 or 3 years to accumulate the support that could have been, it's like, and I tell people, yeah, you can do the Sinclair method without support. Absolutely. But it's going to take you longer and it's going to be a lot harder. And more often than not, people will give up too soon. So everybody always wants to know, how can I hack the system? How do I make the Sinclair method work as fast as possible? Get a coach, work with a doctor who really understands how the Sinclair method works. I mean, even if you only see a coach every couple of months, something is better than nothing.
Right.
If you have very tailored, questions that need specific context, there's so many people in the TSM community that you can reach out to, and and the support is just, it's so critical, because it doesn't have to be paid support, but individual support is incredibly, incredibly important.
Yeah, I agree. Even if you just check in once every couple months, that can be enough to keep you motivated, to keep you on track, to keep you with the right perspective and the right context to your problems, the challenges you're facing. Yeah.
Well, we are out of time. So why don't you give just a final word and let people know about, the fact that you are coaching for YourSinclairMethod.com.
Okay. Well, final word from Coach Samara is, these are a couple mottos that I had started to cultivate and use during my TSM journey. Let's see, a couple of them. The only way out is through. I know Katie says that a lot. But yeah, the only way out is through. You just got to go through it. The best way to go through it is at least with some support, especially from a coach. Every sip of your drink on naltrexone is a step towards extinction. You're one step closer to extinction. So that was a big motto. But yeah, I'll leave you with those and reach out on, what is it called? YourSinclairMethod.com.
Yes.
Anytime you'd like. I'm here.
All right. Thank you for your time and for joining Level Up. And we'll see you later. Thanks to everybody who tuned in. And this will be available on our YouTube soon, but it'll be up on Twitch. I think it allows it to stay for 2 weeks, maybe 1 week. 1 week for certain, possibly 2. And then next month we have Matt Brindley from Rethink Drink, and he's going to be with us on May 22nd, which is a Thursday. And that will be at 10 a.m. Central, 11 Eastern. So bye, everybody.